Hey, I'm here with a little VR. This is quite a throwback. It's a tarot VR called 5 Deep Questions for a Tarot Reader. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and my practice. If you're new here, introduce myself first. Hi, I'm Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. One of the tools I use for that is tarot, and this is actually a VR from 5 years ago from Kimberly over at Fable's Den. I keep VR prompts, challenges in a little database, and I had been actually catching up on some of the older content on the Fable's Den. If you're familiar, that's actually a creator who has now gone on to really focus on deck creation more than tarot reading content. So it was kind of funny to go back and see some of the older content, but I've been following for probably longer than that. And I had some older ones in my queue that I finally got around to. And I thought this was a really interesting VR, and I thought I'd try bringing it back. So if anybody wants to, resurrect this with me, you can check out. I'll leave the prompts down in the description. But basically, these are 5 deep questions to go a little bit more into ourselves as readers. So let's do it. I'll give the context that I am a professional reader, but my business, the umbrella that I use for my business is as a neuroemergence guide. And so I use tarot, I use astrology, I use human design. And I'll be perfectly honest, tarot is actually, well, it was the first modality I started with and the first community I started out in. It is the one I've gotten the fewest professional bookings for. I've actually read for a lot of people outside of a professional context, but I figured that was relevant to this particular challenge because some of the questions are sort of about reading for clients, which I've done only a little bit of. But I'd love to do more, and you can book me with me below if you're interested. But let's get started. The first prompt here is, let me bring my computer a little closer. By the way, you may recognize this as the COVID chair. So I'm not at my normal recording spot because my post-COVID symptoms are unfortunately pretty bad this week. So apologies if I'm getting way out of breath. That's just how my life is these days. But I wanted to do some tarot content as well because folks on my newsletter actually recently did a subscriber survey, and tarot was one of the things that folks were most interested in. So if you're coming here from the newsletter, hi, and if you're not already there, you can sign up below, and I'll be doing more tarot content. Did a little bit this week talking about tarot related to astrology and the Fool and Gemini, and so definitely check that out. Okay, so the first prompt, which tarot card describes you as a reader? For example, a card that represents your approaches, worldviews, or style. So I thought this was a really broad prompt when thinking of what am I like as a reader? How do I read? My approach? There's a lot of possibilities. But the very first thing that came to mind that sort of stuck with me was actually the Hierophant. So I'm going to be showing examples from Charlie Claire Burgess's The Fifth Spirit. This is the indie edition, but the mass market just came out, so I figured it was a good time to use this one. So, yeah, the Hierophant. So there's a traditional interpretation of this, and some people will pull this card and they think more of tradition, religion, established structures, but I actually view the Hierophant card quite differently. And so for me, this card describes how I am as a reader because I'm very much into helping folks to find their own wisdom and their own path and their own rituals and practices, and how to actually work with the tarot itself. If I'm reading for folks who have a deck themselves, I'll often encourage, to put cards that are particularly meaningful in a reading to keep them up in their space to meditate on or get to connect with that card. And when I do readings for others, a big part of my style, I would say, is that I will certainly interpret the card the way I understand it, bring up some of the themes that I understand and connect them to the question. And another card I thought of for myself might be the Magician, because I definitely do tend to channel verbally. But then I'm always asking a lot of questions, and I'm always trying to connect it back to their context and understand, what do these themes bring up for you? How do you think this relates to the question? What was your reaction to seeing this card that I just pulled? So for me, that's very Hierophant, because it's all about trying to find your own inner wisdom, your own teacher, your own interpretations of the card. And I don't have any way to have the full context for you. We need to connect, and I need to have context for you for that. But even if we did, you're going to be the person with the most context for yourself. So I think what I've done a lot is, when folks feel challenged by a card or uncertain about a card, really helping them to see the ways in which they can be empowered with that card, and the ways in which they can be both the person receiving the reading, but also the person that holds the wisdom themselves. So I don't like to do very one-way directed tarot readings. If you actually look at this example, you have kind of like a scientist or a doctor archetype, and I think this whole library of knowledge. So I like that as well. There's something in the Hierophant to me that really speaks to interpretation and language, which is a strong point of mine. And because I do work with a lot of neurodivergent folks and kind of neurodivergent adjacent folks, and I'm neurodivergent myself, associations and meanings are really big for me. The web of meaning, tying into it, connecting to that, and finding the best ways to interpret the language of spirit through the cards to the querent, I think is a particular gift of mine, and also something that's really important for me in my particular reading context. So I like the Hierophant for that. The second prompt was, what is your favorite card to see when you're doing readings for another person or a client? Why is it your favorite? So again, I could think of a lot of different possibilities with this one. I kind of like to see some of the more difficult cards sometimes, because it's just a really good opportunity to shift a little bit and to bring about other interpretations, or other ways of thinking about those. So I love the Death card, for example. It's actually one of my favorite cards in the deck. I had a coworker once. I used to do readings a lot at work in a nonprofit, nothing to do with tarot, but just I would give people readings if they wanted them. And this one guy, it was so funny because he was like, I want to do it, but I'm afraid of getting the Death card. And I was like, okay, so the Death card doesn't mean you're gonna die, but let's do it. I sit down and pull 5 of Cups, 3 of Swords, 10 of Swords, and I really felt like the deck was just saying, all right, motherfucker, let's go, right? Like, you were afraid of the Death card, but let me give you something to be afraid of. So along that vein, the card I picked for this is that I like to see when I'm the reader is the Devil, because this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. I actually pulled it, shout out to a Tarot Tube person. Actually, one of the people who really helped me to start connect on Tarot Tube was Ethany. I was kind of bummed that there wasn't a 31 Days of Tarot Challenge this year, but that was kind of how I got my starting audience in 2019. At the Northwest Tarot Symposium last year, I actually pulled the Devil from Ethany's little bin of cards you could pull from at their reading table, and I was just thrilled, and Ethany pointed out, I hadn't noticed that my badge for the conference, they each had a card on it, and then I had the Devil, and I was like, that is it, I'm in. Because for me, I like pulling the Devil. I know it has a lot of challenging connotations to folks. I actually really like the Lucifer archetype even. I like to work with that archetype. Now, I don't have a Christian background, and I realize people can have, there can be a lot there. And I want to be mindful of that, and I'm respectful of that, of course, when people do come from that background, that there might be a lot wrapped up in the imagery of the Devil. But what I think is really interesting about that, in the context of this card, is that for me, the Devil is really an opportunity to look at things that we might be judging as evil or immoral or wrong, or, often, people get this and be like, oh, there's something going on with addiction, there's something going on with, something bad for you. I actually find that while that can certainly come up, I really like my primary tarot teacher, Lindsay Mack, talks about this. For was like, don't drop that in my drink. Talks about this, that the devil isn't necessarily pointing to that activity that you might think would be devilish, but it can point to things like the way that we are assuming that something is bad, the way that society is labeling something as bad. That actually, like, devil energy, when we're caught up in it, can be more about the restraints we put on ourselves that are unnecessary. The shame and the guilt, for example. We might, I think about this card a lot when I think about something like, let's say like kink or BDSM practices, right? That somebody might have this fear of getting found out, or this guilt or this shame around it, or might have to deal with societal judgment if they're interested in such practices. But that if practiced healthily, there's nothing wrong with them. And the devil has a real freeing, thing. You can see in this version, you do have the person who has a drink and the person who has a cigar, and you have these hands. So like, this is maybe not the best version to illustrate this, but even so, you can kind of tell that the strings aren't actually holding them that tightly. And that's often true when you look at the devil card, is that the cage or the strings, or however it's portrayed, the chains, that the people could actually get out of them if they wanted to. And so I find that the devil is a really good archetype for freedom, liberation, for asking yourself. And so this is in a reading, I like getting it because we can kind of talk through, like, what is there that you think you should do, or you think you should be a certain way? Or are there messages from your society, your family, your just internalized, that you're actually ready to let go of right now? And can you actually take the hand of the devil and say, fuck it, and move forward? And so I find that being somebody who is a reader, who is, kink aware, non-monogamous, what else? I'm everything queer, basically. Like, if you can name it, I'm probably that. I have a lot of identities that can be, shamed and blamed, and that folks reclaim. And I think there's a really powerful queer energy to me in the devil card. And so I like to be that bridge for people. Number 3 is just, why do you practice tarot? And I think this is a pretty simple answer for me. I mean, it's a language of archetypes. I'll try to remember to leave in the card above. I talked a little bit about archetypes in my spiritual practice, and that's really the answer in some ways. I find that as an autistic person, sometimes I get kind of disoriented and lost, and it's really helpful for me to have anchors to grasp onto. And so tarot cards are one of those. Having this rich language of kind of storytelling and images that allow me to contextualize my life. So I don't use tarot primarily when reading, although I do read for myself and others, but I almost use it, not almost, I definitely use it more in the sense of like, oh wow, this is a real like 7 of Swords moment. Oh, I'm going through 3 of Cups right now. Oh, this feels like 2 of Wands, right? It's more of a language to interpret the world. That's what I love about it. Now, why do I practice it in terms of pulling cards? It's a great way for me to tap in. It's a great way for me to do that without having to be totally clear and like clearing my energy. Like, I can focus on something, I have something specific to focus on, works really well for me. And I find that the tarot is my best tool for almost like jokingly like self-therapy. It can be really good for both questions and answers to guide my own exploration of my experience through a structured language that works really well for my neurodivergence and just for me as a person. In terms of why do I practice tarot with others and why is it part of my business and reading, it's very similar. It's that I work with a lot of neurodivergent folks, and I find it's a really good language. I find that tarot in particularly, even though I don't do as many readings professionally, just not by my choice, but just because what apparently has like clicked with people is not always tarot, it's other languages, but it does come up a lot as a kind of supplemental tool where I can be working with a client and they're going through something. I'm like, I'm really like hearing like Seven of Cups and what you're saying. Do you have a tarot deck? Could we pull out that card and take a look at it? I find it to be really useful for, again, like having something tangible that I can ask somebody to like put by their computer or wherever they'll see it, so that they can, continually be reminded of it. It's really useful for that. And I love just, having a language to structure things through is really helpful for my intuition. 4, what is the gift you want to give the world as a tarot reader? I think I touched upon this, but I very much see my sort of niche when it comes to tarot as really being about my like fairly diverse experiences in areas that not everybody has. Of course, I also have privileges. I'm a white person. I'm a settler. I'm in the United States. I have some class and education privilege, so I'm not discounting that. But I do think that as somebody who's a relationship anarchist, who has a very particular, way of viewing relationships on their own terms, outside of any particular sort of like, this is what a family relationship looks like, this is what a romantic relationship looks like, this is what any kind of relationship looks like. I think that's something that I really specifically bring as a tarot reader. And I'll also try to remember to link below. I have a totally free resource, and it's pretty robust. If you want to check it out, it's just called Tarot for Inclusive Relationship Readings. So if you're curious about that, I've put out a free resource for the community, and you can click on that. That's just an area where I found is really helpful, because in the context of tarot community, I think a lot of the cards that reference relationship, that it's really useful to be able to, whether it's specific cards or just relationship topics, it's useful to have a broader, more inclusive view of relationship, of human relationship. So that's definitely something I bring. I would say, just like that intersectional view. So it includes disability justice. I'm neurodivergent. I'm disabled. I have chronic illness, as I'm gasping through, apologies, with post-COVID, but I've had chronic illness before that as well. I have a lot of experience in, like, whether it's social justice movements, whether it's just in like other, areas, being like an autistic and an ADHD person. I've had all sorts of interests. So I really just think the gift I bring is that I bring in a lot of different viewpoints in that way, and that I'm kind of aware of the pitfalls and the ways in which like cultural context matters to the tarot. And so I'm pretty good at like pointing that out and helping others to see different interpretations of cards, and then being, it's not very humble, but I would say, when I'm reading, that I would say I have a pretty good ability to be aware of where I don't know somebody's context, and to leave space for it in a reading, and that's important. And finally, number 5, if you were given the chance to experience life all over again with a new major arcana as your primary narrative and worldview, which major arcana card would you choose and why? So that one is fascinating, right? Like, and it's interesting that it's your primary narrative and worldview, because in a way I would see there's a little different, like the path you walk versus how you see things. But I thought about, there were several cards I considered, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. Like, is it the Fool? I know I've always kind of like admired people who are really spontaneous. Is it, what else did I think of? I was like, maybe it's the Empress. But what I ended up on, which maybe is not that different from how I am now. It's kind of funny. Like, now that I look at it, I go, is this different? But I thought of the Hermit, and I think the reason I thought of the Hermit, it's less the worldview, because I would say maybe, but, I would love to be a professor, which you might think of the Hierophant, but like specifically I would love to do really, really niche research and not have to worry about my survival needs, and just feel like we're going to dig in on this topic. So the sort of a very contemplative life, and being able to, like, I think maybe part of what drew me to this card was I've admired people who are able to really like tune out the rest of the world, because I'm a pretty solo person, but at the same time, I'm also, it's very easily for me to get emotionally dysregulated. I'm, you know, sensitive to a lot of things, and I value those as gifts. But if I were to declare a redo, I think I would love to be one of these people who can just sort of like go into their own world. So maybe I'd be like autistic but not ADHD, I don't know, but just be able to like tune things out and really focus on like become, I don't know if I think of the hermit as an expert, but like the hermit has so much wisdom, like to be able to really cultivate wisdom in like one particular area and not get distracted. That seems really cool to me. So I think that would be what I would pick. Okay, so again, that was the 5 deep questions for a tarot reader from the Fables Den. I'll be sure to leave the link in the description to that original video 5 years ago. And if these questions prompt your own interest and you want to respond, you should do so on your own channel or on your social media or whatever. I don't have social media anymore, but I support you. And if you enjoyed this content, if you want to see more, you know, again, my newsletter is down below. You can also download the free resource on tarot for inclusive relationship readings, and that will opt you into my newsletter so you can see when there's new YouTube coming out, but also new blog content. And it's just a one-stop shop for everything. You can know when things are coming out because I am actually planning to do at least one, probably more than one, workshop this year that has to do with tarot. And I'm really excited about that, so I would love to have some more tarot folks over there. All right, let me know in the comments below if there's anything you want me to cover about tarot on this channel or anything else, and we'll see you in the next video.